All right. By my calculations, it is approximately 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so we will get started. So welcome everyone to the CMR Journal Club. We're going to be talking about developments in low field CMR this week. So I know this is everyone's very favorite week, the week that the European countries have gone through their daylight savings time and the Americas have not yet. So I know that we're, kind of in a little bit of a funny week where some of our European colleagues might not have been able to make it because we're an hour earlier for them. But I believe that we have a recording, so if anyone wants to watch this afterwards, then they can totally do that. So again, the reason that we chose the topic of developments in low field CMR this week is because there's been a lot of interesting things going on in the low field side. So there's a couple of new magnets that are being used for low field CMR. So you may have heard of a 0.55 Tesla system that is now commercially available and a couple of groups are using, but there's also some work happening at magnets like 0.35 Tesla and 0.75 Tesla. And that's actually where we're going to start today. And before I hand it over to our first presenter, I just wanted to also remind anyone who's interested in CMR at unconventional field strengths that the ISMRM or the SCMR ISMRM co-provided workshop this year, which is right before the SCMR annual meeting, is going to be on the topic of high field and low field CMR. So this is going to be held on January 24th and 25th, immediately before the SCMR annual meeting in London. And I'll put a link to this meeting in the chat so you guys can check it out if you are interested. Okay, at this point, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sophie Peereboom, who is working at the ETH in Zurich, and she'll be presenting her work on CMR spectroscopy at 0.75 T. So you can go ahead and share your screen and we can get going.
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. First of all, I did this work during my time at ETH Zurich, not working there anymore. I'm now working for Philips, still in the field of MR, but not at ETH anymore. So what we did is we explored the possibilities of proton spectroscopy for cardiac purposes at lower field strengths at 0.75 Tesla. And well, the field of proton spectroscopy in the heart is not a topic on which many people are working, but we want to use it to assess metabolism in healthy and diseased hearts. And just as a short introduction, it can be advantageous to do this at higher field strengths because you have just higher signal, higher thermal polarization. You have larger peak separation. However, there are also some disadvantages like larger field inhomogeneities. You have longer RF pulses because of the SAR issues. And also the ECG signal is more tricky to get right at higher field strengths. But so lower field strengths can be good for also spectroscopy because RF pulses can be shortened, so your echo time can be shortened, which gives you a bit of signal back again. Also T2 values and also T2 SAR values are getting longer, which makes sure that your peaks are getting narrower again, which can even partly compensate for the fact that your peak separation is getting smaller. And you also have improved spatial localization at lower field strengths. So what's the purpose of our goal was to just investigate whether this would be possible, cardiac proton spectroscopy at lower field strengths, in this case 0.75. We did this by investigating it not only in the heart, but also in the muscle in the leg, and did some ex vivo measurements and some simulations to assess SNR levels there. So what system did we use? We used actually a very special one, a 3T system, which was downramped manually to 0.75 Tesla, so fourth of the field strength, and used a coil that was designed for carbon-13 at 3 Tesla to measure proton at 0.75 Tesla. So it was a very experimental setup, so to say. And we also couldn't use the body coil to transmit. We had to use this coil, which was sometimes a bit tricky in homogeneity, but it worked. So different coils we used, this coil for cardiac measurements, and we did comparison measurements at 1.5 Tesla with just a normal cardiac receive coil. And interesting to say is that, well, the comparison measurements at 0.75, 1.5, and 3 Tesla all had similar gradients settings. So you could compare the systems in that sense one-to-one. We used press sequences, did that, well, I said ex vivo in duck breast and in vivo in the leg and in the heart. And also acquired series of different echo times and different repetition times to assess T2 and T1 values. Also perform simulations to compare measurements SNR to what we expect. And here just a quick overview of the pulse sequence. And we see very well that RF pulses have the potential to become shorter at lower field strength, which also causes shorter echo time. And of course, we have the thing that bandwidth can also decrease at lower field strength, which can also be beneficial for signal. Exactly for the simulations, we tested two cases, one where echo times and bandwidth were not dependent on field strength, and one where they are dependent on the field strength. So where we took this RF changes and the bandwidth reduction into account. Now, quickly to some results. First, ex vivo comparison of spectra we measured, and we see T1, T2, and T2 star values fitted for the water signal in a nice fit, and also for triglyceride signals, where we see that, which also agrees with literature values, that T2 values for triglycerides are kind of independent on field strength. However, T2 star values become dependent on field strength. Here we have some simulations where we see that, of course, at lower field strength, you have a loss of SNR. However, you can kind of compensate for that with the shorter radio frequency pulses and also the reduction in bandwidth. And by that, you don't lose that much SNR as you would maybe expect based on just common calculations. Some in vivo leg measurements, some spectra, just as an example. It's still preliminary, so one can also see it's not yet optimal, but just as a proof of concept, we see that we can acquire spectra at 0.75 Tesla, compare them to 1.5 Tesla and 3 Tesla. Also, FITS shows that we can distinguish metabolites. Like in the ex vivo duck breast, we see a similar relation on T1, T2, and T2 star values on field strength, where T2 and T2 star are higher for lower field strength, T1 is shorter. Just images on the heart, some cine images on which we did the planning. It's very nice to see that we can acquire some good images at 0.75 Tesla. We see it's not as homogeneous as the other field strengths, which also had to do with our experimental setting and the fact that there was no body coil, but still we could use them for planning. Then to the spectra. Also here, of course, you see the reduction in spectral separation. However, the longer T2 star values also make the peaks narrower, and we can distinguish relevant metabolites. And finally, just an image on how we also some T1 and T2 star detection in the heart. The T1 we determined based on mapping, and the T2 star values we based on the line width of the water peak in spectroscopy. And again, we see this very nice relation. So just to summarize, because I think my 10 minutes are almost getting to the end, we just showed our preliminary experiences on cardiac proton spectroscopy on a clinical 3 Tesla system, which was ramped down to a field strength of 0.75 Tesla. We showed field dependence of T1, T2, and T2 star values that we were obtained ex vivo and also in vivo, compared them to simulations where they also agree with what we simulated. Yes, and although the peak separation in hertz of course, decreases linearly with the decreasing field strength. The longer T2 star values still can improve spectral quality again to distinguish the adequate metabolites. And of course, there were only a few volunteers measured in the study, so it's not yet enough to make any statistical analysis or draw any broad conclusions on this. But I think it's a good feasibility study that is also showing that the classical field strength dependent SNR scaling can be partly counteracted by considering some other relaxation properties that become favorable at lower field strengths. That's all it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Peereboom. If there are any questions, you can go ahead and either unmute yourself and ask your question live and in person over Zoom, or you can type a question into the chat and I can read it out loud. So maybe I will start with the first question. So you talked about the longer T2 star values in the metabolites, and maybe I missed it, but it looked like you had a table with T2 star values, at least of water, and those were similar at 0.75 T and at 1.5 T. Is that
yes? The T2 it's here.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's based on both the water and the triglycerides. The T2 and T2 star values of water, they do depend on field strength, as we also see here. And actually, the pure T2 values of triglycerides, they seem to not depend on field strength. However, if you calculate back what the T2 star value of triglyceride would have been based on also the line width of the water peak, then you see that the T2 star values actually do depend on the field strength.
Okay, got it. I think I was looking at the, I think you have a chart further below where you have the water values. Here, exactly.
It's here, yes.
And what is causing this to be so, the value to be so similar to 1.5 T? Do you know, or is this something just because it was?
I think here, yeah, this was specifically something we saw in the muscle. This is indeed not exactly the same behavior as in the phantom, in the ex vivo duck breast. I think it just also has to do with the number of volunteers that were measured and the uncertainty of the measurements here, because this is indeed something we are not expecting here. We expect the decrease over field strength to be higher than here for T2 values.
Great. Are there any other questions from the audience? Again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, maybe I'll ask one more question that's a little bit, it's kind of related, kind of unrelated. So, I mean, I think when people think lower field strength, they automatically think lower SNR, right? And they will think spectroscopy, why
Yes.
are you moving in this direction? So did you experience a lot of pushback when you started reporting that, you know, some of these SNR losses could be regained by optimizing the pulse sequence, you know, to take advantage of some of these effects? Or is this something that, you know, once people saw it, they were like, yes, this makes sense to us?
I mean, of course, you always have the SNR loss because you're just moving to a lower field strength, but you can regain some of this SNR by the possibility of having shorter echo times because of the shorter RF pulses. The properties regarding T1 and especially T1 are favorable because T1 is lower. So depending on the repetition time you choose for spectroscopy, you can also regain some of that there. And of course, bandwidth is also something that you can reduce, which you can give you back SNR. So it will still be lower than at higher field strengths, but you can compensate to some extent.
All right, we do have one question in the chat, and it says, how long was the total acquisition time at 0.75 T for the cardiac volunteers? And they're also thanking you for the excellent paper.
Thank you very much. If I recall, it was in the order of 15 minutes, depending on their breathing pattern, because we used navigators to track the breathing and to gauge the acquisition. And of course, if volunteers are breathing very steadily, it takes shorter, if not a bit longer, but in the order of 15 minutes.
And how does that compare to the higher field protocols?
It was the same. It was the same protocol.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah.
All right, awesome. So let's thank Dr. Peereboom one more time. Thank you so much for presenting your paper. And we're now going to move over to Dr. Ye Tian, who is at the University of Southern California, and he'll be presenting some of the work that he's done at 0.55T, looking at collecting simultaneous multi-slice acquisitions, this time looking at cardiac imaging as opposed to spectroscopy.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation and the introduction. So the paper I'm going to present is contrast optimal simultaneous multi-slice bSSFP cine cardiac imaging at 0.55 Tesla. So the purpose of this work is to determine if contemporary 0.55 Tesla MRI scanners can support the use of contrast optimal flip angles for SMS balanced SSP cardiac function assessment. So which is probably not possible at higher field strengths because of the SAR limitation. And in the method, we specifically implemented a blip-type bSSFP pulse sequence that enabled the SMS acquisition and combined that with a spiral sample for the pulse sequence. And for the testing, we tested on 7 healthy volunteers and sweep the flip angle with a large range, but the range is like on the higher side because of the low field. And we compared the signal intensity in the blood and myocardium, and also the contrast between the blood and the myocardium to determine if we achieved the contrast optimal flip angle. And the result is better visualized in the figures, so I will skip that part. And the brief conclusion is that the low field scanner or the contemporary low field scanner supports the use of contrast optimal flip angle for SMS accelerated bSSFP cine. And we determined the contrast optimal flip angle for different SMS factors. And for single band, it's actually a little bit higher at 140 degree to 160 degree. And for SMS, it's around 100 to 120 degree in terms of the flip angle. So motivation is that there is a recent interest in looking at cardiac images at low field strength scanners because some of the advantages like reduced SAR and shorter T2 star and longer T1 and lower suspectability effects and lower B0 inhomogeneity. And simultaneous multi-slice is a good or a great acceleration for cardiac examinations. And but on higher field strengths, this technique is usually limited by the SAR issue. So often the contrast optimal flip angle cannot be used on 1.5 or 3 Tesla if you combine bSSFP with SMS. So both the SAR constraint and B0 inhomogeneity are greatly reduced at low field strengths. So in this study, the hypothesis that the contemporary low field scanner can support the use of contrast optimal flip angle. We also did a experimental determination of the contrast optimal flip angle because this cannot be reflected from purely block simulation because of the flow effects in the blood pool, and the blood is not in steady state, instead is always in the transient state. So this flip angle needs to be determined in the experiment. And method, we have a blip-type SMS bSSFP with spiral readout. And one thing to note is that during the pulse sequence design, we noticed that the limiting factor for designing a SMS pulse is not SAR, but the peak V1 that is able to achieve at the scanner. So this is something interesting to know. So the whole sequence diagram provided here, I will skip the technical details because there are too much technical details, and some detailed implementation can be found here. And so to determine the contrast optimal free angle, we scanned 7 healthy volunteers. And on our 0.55 Tesla scanner, which is a ramped down era, and has a high performance gradient, which is different than the commercially available Freemax. Freemax has a lower gradient performance, and on the 7 healthy volunteer, we run the SMS cine with a lot of different flip angles. So we scanned from SMS 1, which is single band, to SMS of 3. And the flip angle range is from 60 to 140 for the SMS. And for single band, we acquired an even higher one, 160 degree. And the images were reconstructed by the spatially and temporally constrained reconstruction. Here's the cost function we minimize. Let's skip the details here. And in the analysis, we pick one systolic and one diastolic phase from the images in the mid ventricular slice. And we manually draw ROI on the blood pool and myocardium, and we calculate signal level, and we also calculate the contrast between the blood and myocardium by doing the subtraction. And the signal intensity and contrast is normalized by the background noise. So result here, first result is comparison in terms of image quality between single band SMS of 2 and 3. So we can see from this image that it's pretty much consistent image quality across different SMS factors. And this image was acquired at 120 degree. And next figure is the flip angle sweep. So we start from flip angle of 60 and went up to 160 for single band, and this is for SMS. And we can notice from the image that as we go to a higher flip angle, we do see an increase in the contrast between the left ventricle blood pool versus the myocardium. And this trend is very obvious on the single band, but it's less obvious on the SMS. And you sort of see the contrast get plateaued after around here. So this is just a visualization, and it's more clear if we do the actual quantitative comparison in terms of signal intensity and the contrast between blood and myocardium. So this is the result. The horizontal one is different flip angle, and the vertical axis is the signal intensity or the blood to myocardium contrast. And as we can see, single band, you get a constant increase in the blood pool signal, but it's also get plateaued after 120 degree. And most of the contrast is increasing though. And most of the contrast increasing is attributed from the decreasing in the myocardium signal. So if you want a higher myocardium signal, you probably don't want to go to a very high flip angle. And the case is the same. The trend is the same for SMS, like drop 2 and 3, but it's got plateaued a little bit earlier at around 100 and 120 degree. And the contrast optimal flip angle for single band is probably 160, and for SMS is around 100 and 120 degree. So some discussion is that we notice the difference in terms of the signal intensity and contrast. This is probably because of the flow effects in the blood pool that that is get saturated by the high flip angle for the SMS, because SMS excites multiple slices, which is a larger volume compared to single band, so that blood got saturated during the flowing, and once it gets to the imaging slice, the signal intensity will decrease. So that's why the SMS has a lower signal intensity in the blood pool than the single band. And yeah, that's pretty much my. Also, we have data available online if you want to take a look. So yeah, that's pretty much my presentation. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for presenting this work. So again, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. You can go ahead and ask the question, or you can type a question into the chat. So again, to kick things off, I'll start with a question. So you used a spiral acquisition trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the spiral itself? So was this a fully sampled spiral where the acceleration was in the slice direction only, or was it an undersampled spiral as well?
Yeah, this is a fully sampled spiral. So we want to make the comparison very simple. So we only did a fully sampled spiral for all the 3 acceleration factors. And this is also a uniform spiral, not variable density spiral. But we also had some preliminary results if we go slightly higher undersample. It's in the discussion section. We can successfully reconstruct the images by accelerating 3 more times on top of the SMS of 3. So I think it's somewhere here. I didn't highlight it, but we have the result.
Okay, great. Questions from the audience? Okay, I'll ask another question. So as a group with a Freemax, I'm very curious, what sort of modifications you would make to your acquisition. I know I saw that you had this portion here. So, you would definitely have to change the spiral readout because the gradients, would be a little bit slower. So if you change the repetition time to take into account the readout, how would that change the calculation of your flip angles? Would you still suggest, imagining you're not doing multi-slice, but just a single slice, would you still want to be at a flip angle of about 160, or would you probably, actually, maybe you'd want to be higher given the longer TR? How would those two things play together?
Yeah, I think one consideration if you go to the Freemax is the prolonged TR, and that can potentially cause some artifacts either from flow because of the longer acquisition, or the banding because of the longer TR. So you probably want to, if you want to keep the same acquisition time, you probably want to do slightly undersample. So your each readout is shorter, so your TR is shorter, and overall sample efficiency is not fully sampled, so slightly undersampled. And in terms of the flip angle, I think bSSFP is not very sensitive to TR. The contrast or the signal intensity is not sensitive to TR. So I would say the optimal flip angle might still hold for Freemax. Even you put on the TR, the flip angle doesn't affect the signal intensity that much.
All right, great. So we do have a question in the chat. And the question is, what was the limitation that B1 caused? What is the max B1 for this system? Can you get around it with a different RF pulse shape? And the comment also includes the compliment that it's a very nice paper.
Yeah, I think the B1 is mostly from the hardware. So there's a limit that we can use. And also we like all the pulse sequence is fixed on our experiment. So even though the SAR is no longer a limitation, but sometimes if you have a larger patient, that can also hit the SAR limit. So we want to keep the pulse sequence consistent. So we design the pulse sequence in prior and use a slightly conservative peak B1 value, but the actual peak B1 value can be slightly higher than that. That is limiting by the hardware. I think it's around 20 or something microtesla, 22 maybe. I don't have the number in mind, but that's the limiting factor for the SMS design.
All right, great. So we've come to the end of our half an hour. So again, thank you to Dr. Tan for presenting this excellent work on the high performance low field system. I want to remind everybody of two things. Number one, we will be having our next Journal Club meeting on December 6th. I'm putting the link in the chat for those of you who haven't signed up or who didn't get a link for any reason. Go ahead and sign up there, and you'll be getting information about the topic of that journal club and how to log in. And we'll be back to our normal time then once this part of the world has our daylight savings as well. So we'll be back to 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 on the East Coast. And then it is, I believe, 4 o'clock in the UK and 5 p.m. in Europe. So that's announcement number one. And number two is, again, a plug for the workshop on low field and high field CMR, which is coming up in London on January 24th and 25th. There's a lot of low field work that will be presented there and a lot of interesting discussions. So if you are doing low field CMR or interested in starting up, that would be a great place to meet people who are doing a similar topic. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you to our presenters, and I hope to see you guys next month.